Hello everyone, and welcome to a short webinar on living arrangements for those who are on income and disability assistance. We are Ask an Advocate, which is a website-based project created to help clients and service providers find information and resources about income assistance, disability, tenancy, and other income supports. In this webinar, we will go over how living arrangements can affect the assistance benefits. If an individual is applying for or is already on ministry assistance, it's important to understand what happens to their benefits based on their living arrangements. Who they live with can affect their application, as well as the amount they may be eligible to receive. Please remember that the information provided in this webinar will be applicable in British Columbia only. The Income and Disability Assistance Program is available through the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, and in this webinar, we will simply refer to them as the Ministry. For information on how to become eligible for income or disability assistance, visit our website or watch our webinar on income assistance eligibility by clicking the link in the description below. In this webinar, we will cover living arrangements, how to add a partner to a ministry file, roommates, and how different types of shelter arrangements can change the shelter amounts. Please note, however, that all numbers we refer to in this webinar will be based on information for the year 2021. In this section, we will go over the ministry's definition of family unit, dependents, and spouses. Before an applicant can determine how much they can receive, or what their asset limit is while receiving income or disability assistance, they must first figure out what their family unit size is. A family unit is defined as an applicant and their dependents. A dependent can be either the applicant's dependent child under the age of 19, or the applicant's spouse. The ministry defines two people as spouses if they are married, if they declare they're in a marriage-like relationship, or if they meet all of the following criteria. They have resided together for at least 12 consecutive months, they demonstrate financial dependence, and they demonstrate social and familial interdependence. It's important to note that if someone is in a relationship but not living together, nor sharing expenses or parental responsibility, then the partner's income should not affect their assistance. When the applicant moves in with their partner, that is when things can become more complicated. The applicant needs to make sure that they do not claim or agree to being in a marriage-like relationship until they are sure that they meet the criteria. When they are classified as a spouse, the ministry will then add their partner's information to their ministry file, and they must then be reassessed for eligibility. This section is on how to add a partner to a ministry file and what happens once a recipient does. Once a recipient meets the ministry's definition of spouse, it's important that they add their partner to their ministry file. The ministry will assess their partner's eligibility, and their income and assets may impact the recipient's eligibility. If the recipient is still determined as eligible for assistance, their rate will go up to the applicable couple rate. In addition, their earning exemption and assets may also increase, but will be shared between the spouses. An example would be if after adding a spouse to their file, the recipient now has a $400 monthly earning exemption on income assistance. This amount is shared between the recipient and their partner. This does not mean that each spouse has an earning exemption of $400, but rather they can earn $400 combined. The charts above show the differences in the earning exemptions, asset limits, and maximum benefit rates for single and couples on income assistance, persons with persistent multiple barriers, and persons with disabilities. This table gives an idea of how much the benefits would change if two people are considered spouses and are still deemed eligible for assistance. As shown here, the rate, limits, and exemptions will increase by a bit, but also note these amounts are shared between the spouses. This section gives some examples of how to avoid suspicions of fraud with the ministry if a recipient is living in a roommate situation. If an income or disability assistance recipient is living with someone else but not in a marriage-like relationship, there are multiple ways they can prove they are roommates and avoid suspicions of fraud from the ministry. Some of these are that the applicant should have separate tenancy agreements, the applicant may want to pay rent directly and separately to the landlord, the roommates should have separate bedrooms, the applicant should have a written agreement to split utilities costs, And lastly, the applicant should not have a joint bank account or credit card with their roommate, combine their incomes, pay each other's bills, or insure each other's vehicles. This section is on shelter costs, shelter information form, types of accommodations, as well as room and board. The Ministry Assistance Check is split into two portions, support and shelter. Usually, when an applicant is deemed eligible for assistance, they should receive the full support portion. For the shelter portion, the applicant must have actual shelter costs and prove it to the ministry. For example, if the applicant is homeless and don't have any actual shelter costs, they may only be eligible for the support portion of their ministry check. In addition, if their rent is lower than the maximum rate for their family size, they will only receive the actual cost of their shelter rather than the maximum rate. For example, if the applicant is a single person, the maximum amount they could receive for shelter is $375. But if their rent is $200, they would then only receive $200. See the chart on the slide for the maximum shelter rates dependent on the number of members in a family unit. Items that may be included in the shelter portion are rent, mortgage payments, a house insurance premium, property taxes, and with the ministry's prior approval, the actual cost of maintenance and repairs. In addition to this, any of the following utility costs may also be included: fuel for cooking or heating, water, hydro, garbage disposal provided by a company on either a regular, weekly, or bi-weekly basis, rental of one basic residential single-line telephone, as well as a monthly strata corporation assessment fee for a residence owned and lived in by the client, and lastly, a house insurance premium for co-op and strata owners. To prove the shelter costs, the applicant can provide a few different things: rent receipts, a tenancy agreement, letter from the landlord, mortgage documents, or even utility bills. They can also provide the ministry's shelter information form, which is also known as an intent to rent form. It's important that the ministry has the accurate and updated information about the applicant's current shelter situation and costs to avoid any overpayments or underpayment of assistance. On the screen here is a preview of a shelter information form. To access this form, please visit our website or click on the link in the description below. In this shelter form, the applicant will have to provide information such as their personal info, their rental address, type of rental accommodation, if they need a security or pet deposit, and finally, their landlord's information and signature. The next slide will go over the different types of rental accommodations on this form. There are different categories of rental accommodations that the ministry defines on their shelter information form, such as renting a self-contained unit or room with or without roommates. An example of this would be a private basement suite. The next type of accommodation is room only, which is defined as common areas that are shared with the landlord, but meals are not included. An example of this would be if the applicant is renting a room in a house where they share the kitchen and bathroom with the landlord, but the applicant buys their own food. Room and board is defined as common areas that are shared with the landlord, but meals are not included. Room and board is the same as room only, except that the landlord provides food. The next slide will explain how room and board is treated differently than renting a self-contained suite in room only. Lastly, there is other for accommodations that don't fall within these categories. When an applicant lives in a room and board situation, it is treated differently than renting a self-contained suite or a room only. In a room and board situation, the landlord provides a room and food. In these cases, the ministry may issue the smaller portion of the actual cost of the room and board and a specified monthly support allowance, or the sum of the applicable shelter and support allowances for the family unit size. For example, the comfort allowance amounts for regular room and board are $60 per adult, $40 per child, as well as $127 per PWD status and their transportation supplement. For a room and board example, a single parent of one dependent child is paying $500 in room and board. They would receive the lesser of the following: either $500 as room and board and a comfort allowance of $60 for the client and $40 for the dependent for a total of $600, whereas the maximum amount for a single parent on income assistance is $1,270.58. So in this particular scenario, the client would only receive $600 since it is the lesser amount. If an applicant is homeless or does not have any shelter costs, the ministry will only issue the support portion. Examples of this situation would be if the applicant is staying with their parents and not contributing to rent, if the applicant is couch surfing, or potentially staying on the streets or in a shelter. Later, when the applicant finds accommodation and have shelter costs, they can submit a shelter information form to the ministry and request the shelter portion. Alright, and thank you for watching, everyone. Feel free to browse through our other webinars and provide us feedback by clicking on the survey link in the description below.